Hey guys, it's Haife and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I am a multidisciplinary scientist and artist eager to share the science art nexus from my lens and my experience. So today is going to be the start of a series, or if you saw one of my earlier videos answering the question, what is Haife, then you may consider it actually a continuation. Um, but this will be the first official video on biochar. So if you've heard of biochar, please leave a comment down below. I am starting this series to continue the conversations around biochar. If you've never heard about biochar before, comment down below. I've been putting together a lot of information about the history, production, and applications of biochar based off of my experience. So during my graduate school, I was in a master's program for environmental science, and there I focused mainly on soil science. And the research that I was doing, which was funded by a local grant, it was all about making biochar from local waste streams. So, without going further into the context of what biochar is yet, because we're just about to get there, I've spent a lot of time and years thinking about this topic, researching this topic, making this material. And I really just want to share that lens and continue the greater conversation that's happening in agriculture and a few other spaces as well, which we'll get into. So, for this series, we're going to get into what is biochar, an overview of it. Then we're going to get into the indigenous practices and biochar history there, which is really important to always name because a lot of the times in science spaces, there's a lot of differentiation that needs to happen between colonizer science and what is called traditional ecological knowledge, which is the practices that have been had by the people that have been stewarding the land, that is a lot of the times discounted by academic institutions because it doesn't align with colonizer ideals. That's also a conversation for another time. So we're going to talk about indigenous practices and biochar history. We're also going to talk about feedstocks. So what can I use to make biochar? We're going to talk about production methods, versatile applications, using biochar in soil remediation, and also contamination and safety around biochar. So these are the topics of the series that I have outlined. And today we're just going to get into biochar. What is it? Because if you're still watching this video, you might be like, what the heck, Haife? I still don't know what you're talking about. That's okay. Let's get into it. Biochar is a stable carbon-rich material produced by burning biomass in an oxygen-limited or oxygen-free environment. So biomass is any biological material, organic matter. So you can think of wood, you can think of um, leaves, you can think of things like corn husk. It's an organic material. And essentially, depending on how you're processing that organic material through fire and the limitation of oxygen to that fire, you can create a stable carbon material. And this is really useful for, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, waste transformation. Which, for example, I was making biochar out of horse manure, and there was a lot of reasons why that as a waste stream needed to be a bit more carefully managed. And I was proposing that this was a really good way to manage that waste while also creating a material that could be beneficial to soil. Um, but yeah, manure is another one of those organic materials that can actually be turned into carbon. So there is a difference between types of carbons that we learn about when we're learning about soil science. So recalcitrant carbon, that is going to be carbon that is not really eaten by microbes or the different organisms that are in the soil. And if so, it's broken down much, 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 much more slowly than what's called labile carbon, or labile. I'm not sure exactly how people pronounce it, but I say labile carbon. And that is going to be way more readily eaten by microbes. So that will have a much shorter lifespan in the soil. And it's really important to have that in a biodiverse ecosystem because, again, it helps to feed those organisms. And the organisms, the more life that you have in soil, literally the better and more ideal that it's going to be. That's why things like monocropping are a really big problem because it's just a one way to get to the limitation of biodiversity, which is not what you want. So, also in this image on the right, I just want to explain why I have that there. So, I used to live in Oregon and I saw, because I'm originally from the East Coast, so when I was living in Oregon, I saw firsthand a lot of the wildfires that would go on. They were happening extremely close to where I was living. There was even a point where we were evacuating the areas and just moving into different areas to stay safe from the wildfires. Um, in the aftermath of that, I would visit the woods and see areas, once it was safe to do so, see areas where there had been burns, and found that biochar is actually something that's naturally created in the forest, just with spare pieces of wood. Like if you have a stump that's decaying and say that like a fungus is decaying the stump and it's starting to like crumble down and a forest fire comes through, uh, that wood can be transformed by the wildfire cycle. So I've heard of groups, a lot of groups on the West Coast that actually go out and they just collect this material to be used in um, gardening or agriculture applications. And it's just been naturally made. So that is one way to have a bit of an energy efficient approach to creating this material because we will get into all of the approaches. There's many, many different um, ways to create this material. There's a lot more controlled and high tech ways, and then there's also very low tech ways. The lowest, of course, being natural fire cycles. Um, and offshoot conversation for another time. There's a lot to say about the fire cycles that we've been seeing, the wildfires on the West Coast and in the North, um, what that means, why that's happening, but a conversation again for another time. So I really like this graphic. It shows in a very accessible way pretty much what's going on. So number one on the left, that's showing you some of the different feedstocks, as I was calling them. We have some wood, we have some shells, whether it be like a walnut shell or something like that. And then we have leaves. So as it says there, the biomass waste can come from agricultural residues. If you're growing corn and you have a bunch of things left over in your field, the cob, the husk, all of that can be used to make biochar. And then in the middle, you can see this is one of the types of systems that can be used to actually produce the biochar. So as it says, these materials are processed with heat under low oxygen conditions to produce the resultant biochar. and it could be applied as a soil amendment to provide multiple environmental benefits. Yes, we will get into the environmental benefits and what it means to amend the soil. And here is just a nice representative picture. This was a paper that came out of Japan. Um, and this can show you, oh, it even has the corn cob, like I mentioned before, some of the wood, rice straw, wheat straw. It can show you just the variety of what biochar can look like, the different sizes, the different textures, and that every single one of those biochars that you see in that image is going to have completely different properties and work differently in the soil. So here I just made a graphic of the different uses of biochar. We have air purification. You can use it as a building material. You can use it as a soil amendment. You can also use it in remediation. I'll get much more deeper into that later in this series. Carbon sequestration. So this is a lot of what I studied in my graduate research. Uh, this horse manure, it wasn't being managed properly. So a lot of the times it would just be going onto fields or going into a landfill. And in those places, it was resulting in either actually more groundwater pollution because of the materials that was inside of that horse manure, or just releasing greenhouse gas emissions because it wasn't able to properly cycle through. So it's releasing, things like methane, which we don't need extra of those emissions. And if you've been educated or educating yourself around climate change and things like that, this is a really big factor of the current climate. So, yes, then also we have using biochar as waste and wastewater treatment. So, if you've ever looked at a water filter, or like even a Brita filter, have you ever been curious of like, what are the different things that's inside of this? If you've ever heard of like a carbon filter, then that's relevant. So, biochar can be applied in those cases. And with any of these uses, you want to consider the safety of the material that's been created and just different things around that, which again, I'll get into in the later part of the series. So, some people ask, okay, what's the difference between biochar, charcoal, and activated carbon? Because you might have heard of activated carbon, you've probably heard of charcoal before. So, biochar, if you break that word up, we have bio, char. Char is the charred material, but bio, that prefix is because the material, when it's actually made, as they say, thermochemically converted, because when it's exposed to that heat and the lack of oxygen, the biomass material undergoes a thermochemical induced conversion. Um, and after it goes through that conversion, it's more or less inert. And what does inert mean? It doesn't really have a charge, it doesn't really have um, much to it. I mean, there's a lot of structural components that are important to consider, and there are some minerals in there, but more or less it's inert. So the bio part of it means that it's actually charged with nutrients, and that can look like a lot of things. It can look like soaking your biochar in something like a compost tea or some type of fish fertilizer, some type of liquidy soup that has the nutrients that you're actually looking to apply in your soil. So the difference between that biochar and charcoal is going to be used for heating, cooking, those type of applications, and activated carbon is specifically processed to have a high surface area, which increases absorption. And this is great for purification and contamination. in a different way and sometimes a similar way than biochar is. So, as I said, it's really important to start off this series considering the indigenous histories from different places around the world. And back when I was doing my research for this, I found this source, and it's actually not even up anymore. So I took these screenshots and I linked it. I do have these sources. By the way, if you're interested in this slideshow, I will have it available for purchase in PDF form. Yeah, there's a ton of information here. And I will have this available on my website so that you're able to access all the sources and further do all of your own research if that's what you're interested in. So, terra preta, this term came up because there was some scientist. Remember what I said before? There were some scientists that made a trip down to the Amazon and found this soil that was super, super rich and super dark. And so it's the term terra preta started to become more well known after this. Um, and but I'm not sure actually like the original uses of terra preta, like that term, but it's essentially a soil that's characterized by high organic matter and darker colors, and it's been observed in the Amazon and a lot of different regions that this source was naming. So it was often containing fragments of pottery, tile, animal bone, which kind of showed the histories and the land use of these places. The charcoal, as it says here, it was suggesting that the burning played a role in the soil formation and was specifically in the form of soil enrichment and waste disposal. So I really appreciate this chart. It shows different regions where they're where they have found soils that contain this high amount of the char. And so we have the Amazon basin, Europe, West Africa, Asia, and it kind of shows what some of the key characteristics were and for how long it was put into use and what that evidence looked like. And this was a specific screenshot that was talking about the use of this in Japan. And there is a long history and continued history of using fire and burning practices in the soil. So you could pause to read this of how it specifically relates to Japan.
作れたか木を切って燃やせば焼き畑だってみんな思うかもしれないけど実はあるわけですよ。切り方知ってるわけですよね。この木は切ってもいい、この木は絶対切っちゃいけないっていう中でこうずっと長く繰り返し繰り返し。
Before the introduction of rice culture to Japan, slash and burn cultivation was the predominant farming method. But since Japan's rapid economic growth, this practice has almost completely disappeared. A farming method with no pesticide and no fertilizer that takes 30 years to complete the rotation of the land use. There are people who hope to pass down this tradition to future generations.
こういう茎が生えて、よもぎが生えて、アザミが生えて、それからだんだんこの木本類が生えてきて、で30年くらいするとこの目の前くらいが生える。
Farmers need to rotate crops every year in order to accommodate the nutrients left in the soil.
一つは春の5月の下旬から今の頃6月の上旬までに焼くいわゆる冷えなぎっていう焼き畑、初年度に冷え作って2年目に泡を作って3年目に大豆を作って4年目に小豆っていうのが一つのパターン。これが昔のこの白山毒の手作りでは主力でした。初年度に冷え作るっていうのは冷えが主食でしたから、冷えは絶対的に売るわけですよね。もう2年目には泡、自分たちが美味しい食べるための泡っていうことですよね。 で3年目になると視力落ちるから大豆作ったりして。
Japanese millet, foxtail millet, soybean, and azuki bean. By growing crops in this order, farmers were able to make the most out of the soil and yield more crops. This is knowledge born out of experience from the days before chemical fertilizers and passed down for centuries in the region. Seishi Yamaguchi grew up on a farm in Hakusan. After living and working in nearby Kanazawa City, he decided to move back to his old home and start again the traditional lifestyle he knew. At the time, there was not a single home continuing the Deisukuri lifestyle.
So that's a short documentary that I can link below that shows the relation of fire in these land stewarding traditions. Um, and yeah, so that's just a little peek and a nod into how Indigenous people around the world have already been doing this. And now, a lot of the times, you see, I mean, at least in the States, you're seeing a lot of, like, because of capitalism, a lot of people making companies that are selling biochar as a product. Um, I have a whole, lot of thoughts and commentary on that. But we're going to stop it there for today. That is the first part of my series. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know how you're feeling about this series, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.